She was in Korea for only 11 days when she made the mistake people said no sane person would make. A stranger slapped her, then slapped her again. Not because she stole, not because she fought, not because she knew who the child was, but because she refused to walk away from a deaf little boy sitting alone in a restaurant. She had never seen him before. She didn't speak his language. She didn't know his family. Yet she signed to him, sat beside him, and when dangerous men came to take him away, she stood in front of him and took the slaps instead. What she didn't know, what nobody told her, was that the child she protected wasn't abandoned. He was the son of the most feared. Nobody warned her that the kindest thing she would ever do would also be the most dangerous. Nobody warned her that one silent conversation with a little boy in a harbor restaurant would unravel every careful, quiet plan she had made for her own survival. Nobody warned her that some acts of goodness come with consequences so large they require an entirely new life to contain them. But then, nobody warns you about the things that matter most. Ades Okonkwo had not come to Busan to be heroic. She had come for Galbi, harbor air, and 48 hours of blessed anonymity. That was the full extent of her agenda. No networking, no NGO deliverables, no performing wellness for people who had watched her life implode from a comfortable distance and wanted regular updates on her recovery, like she was some kind of emotional subscription service they had signed up for. She was done performing. She sat at a corner table in a small restaurant near the harbor, the kind of place that didn't need a sign because the regulars knew and the tourists found it anyway. The menu was handwritten. The galbi arrived on a hot stone plate that hissed like it had opinions. Outside, the Busan harbor was doing its Friday evening thing, all noise and light and the specific romantic chaos of a port city that never fully slept. Ades ate slowly and watched people the way she always did. Occupational habit. 11 years of reading rooms, reading faces, reading the particular quality of silence that surrounded people who couldn't hear had made her observant in ways that occasionally alarmed first dates and always alarmed her ex. You notice too much, Emeka had told her once. He'd meant it as a flaw. It had been, by his own eventual admission, his greatest miscalculation. She noticed the boy at 6:47 in the evening. He was in the corner booth diagonally across from her. 7 years old, perhaps. Navy coat so well cut it looked like it had been made specifically for him, which it probably had. Shoes so clean they were offensive. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes moving across the room in that particular way, calm, careful, cataloging, that she recognized immediately and completely. A waitress stopped at his table, said something. The boy didn't respond. The waitress said it again, louder, because that always works. A man 2 tables away muttered something that had the shape and texture of rude. The boy didn't react to the word, but he saw the man's face and understood exactly what it meant, and something behind his eyes went very carefully still, the way children went still when they were used to being misunderstood and had decided that visibly minding was more trouble than it was worth. Ades put down her chopsticks. She looked at the boy for 3 more seconds, long enough to be certain. Then she raised her hand. "Hello, I see you. Are you okay?" Simple signs, clean and slow so he could read them without strain. The effect was instantaneous and devastating in the best possible way. The boy's entire body changed. His shoulders dropped. His eyes went wide. Not frightened, not startled, but bright in the particular way of someone who has been alone in a crowd for a very long time and has just heard their name. He signed back, small and tentative at first. "You know how to talk to me?" She smiled. "Yes, I know how to talk to you." His name was Min Seo. He was 7. His nanny had dropped him here 2 hours ago, and the nanny's phone had been going unanswered. And the restaurant staff had tried to help in the way that well-meaning people helped when they had no shared language, loudly and repeatedly, and with increasing frustration. They had not noticed what Ades noticed. They had not known what to look for. She moved to his table. She ordered him japchae because he pointed at it with the absolute certainty of a child who had made his decision and was not entertaining counteroffers. She told him about Nigeria, about Lagos, about the ocean, about the way her mother's kitchen smelled on Sundays. He told her about his dog. She caught big and black and very fast, and something that might have been eats everything, and she laughed, and he laughed, and the restaurant continued its Friday evening noise around them like a world that had no idea what was happening in the corner booth. For the first time in 6 weeks, Ades forgot that she was sad. Then night came, the restaurant thinned, still no nanny, still no answer on any phone. The staff began to stack chairs. She could not leave him. That option simply did not exist inside her. So she took his hand, he gave it without hesitation, the easy trust of a child who had made his own assessment and reached his own conclusion, and she walked with him into the cold Busan night, toward light, toward people, toward somewhere that wasn't a closing restaurant. This was, in retrospect, the moment everything began, not the signing, not even the slaps that were coming. This, one woman choosing not to walk away, was the moment a different life started assembling itself around her without asking permission. The black cars came 3 minutes later. 4 of them, silent engines, tinted windows, men in suits who had the posture of people professionally trained to occupy space in ways that discouraged questions. They spoke in Korean, she answered in English. Nobody made progress. When the closest man reached for Min Seo, the boy moved behind Ade's with a speed and certainty that said everything about what he thought of the situation. She planted her feet. She crossed her arms. She looked at the man with the particular expression of a Nigerian woman who had survived. The man who stepped out of the 5th car was not what she expected. She had been bracing for more of the same, more granite jaws, more expensive suits, more men who communicated primarily through physical intimidation and the collective energy of people who had never once in their lives been told no and meant it. What she got instead was silence. A different kind of silence. The men who had slapped her went very still the moment the car door opened. Not the stillness of discipline, the stillness of fear. There was a meaningful difference, and Adaes, who had spent 11 years reading bodies instead of voices, felt it immediately in the way you felt a change in weather before the sky showed any evidence. The man who walked toward her was tall, lean in the way of someone who stayed sharp not for vanity, but because softness was a liability he couldn't afford. Dark coat, no tie. His face was the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more unsettling than handsome. All angles and economy, like everything unnecessary, had been slowly removed until only function remained. He looked at his men first. He said nothing. They stepped back anyway. Then he looked at Adaes. She looked back. She was not going to be the one who looked away first. She had already taken 2 slaps from this man's employees. She had long since exhausted her reserve of deference for the evening. He said something in Korean. Low, controlled. She said in English, I don't speak Korean, but your men have terrible manners, and I'd like someone to explain what is happening before I decide how loudly to make this everyone's problem. Something moved across his face. Not quite a reaction. More like the ghost of one, a flicker so brief she almost missed it. He crouched down. Min Seo had been pressed against Adaes' side, one hand gripping the fabric of her coat with the focused desperation of a child who had decided on an anchor and was not letting go. But when the man crouched, when he came down to the boy's level and signed slowly and carefully, something shifted. Min Seo, it's me, you're safe. The boy's grip on Adaes' coat loosened. Not completely, but enough. He signed back. She protected me. Don't be angry at her. Adaes watched the man's face during those signs and saw something she would think about for a long time afterward. Something that moved through him like a current, fast and deep, and almost immediately buried under control. He blinked once. His jaw tightened. Then he smoothed his expression back to nothing, with the practiced ease of a man who had trained himself to feel things privately, in rooms where no one could observe and therefore no one could use it. He stood. He looked at Adaes. You sign, he said, in English. Clean, precise English, with the particular accent of someone who had learned it as a weapon rather than a courtesy. I do, she said. Where did you learn? That is a very casual question for a man whose employees just hit me twice. The ghost crossed his face again. Faster this time. She was almost certain it was the beginning of something that would have been, under different structural circumstances, a smile. My name is Kwon Ji-ho, he said instead. Min Seo is my son. Your son was sitting alone in a restaurant for 3 hours, Adaes said. Your son was being called rude by strangers who didn't realize he was deaf. Your son ate japchae with a complete stranger tonight because nobody came for him. She watched him absorb this, watched the stillness that moved through him, not the stillness of indifference, but the particular stillness of someone receiving information that hurt and choosing for now to receive it standing. I know, he said. There was a miscommunication. His nanny, I'm not interested in the explanation, Adaes said. I'm interested in the fact that he's okay. Ji-ho looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something to his men in Korean. Quiet. 3 words. All of them moved away. Adaes blinked. She had not expected that. I'd like to take my son home, Ji-ho said, and I'd like you to come with us. Absolutely not, Adaes said. You've been slapped twice by my men, in my city. Outside of a restaurant where my son was left alone for 3 hours because of a failure on my part. His voice did not change in tone or volume, but something in it shifted. Something that might have been, In another man, the beginning of accountability. The least I can do is ensure you're not left standing in the cold. Ades looked at Mincio. Mincio looked up at her and signed. Please come, I want to show you my dog. She closed her eyes briefly. The dog. He had been telling her about this dog for 2 hours. Apparently it was large, black, very fast, and consumed objects that were not food with impressive commitment. She had been genuinely curious. 1 hour, she said. I have a hotel I'm returning to, and absolutely no intention of making this a longer evening than it's already been. Jiho nodded once. Minseo took her hand and tugged her toward the car with the confidence of someone who had already resolved this negotiation internally and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. She got in the car. This was her second mistake. Again, not morally. Morally, it was entirely reasonable. Logistically, she had just entered the private vehicle of the most feared man in Korea on the basis of a 7-year-old's recommendation and her own curiosity about a dog. The car was obscenely comfortable. She sank into the seat with the involuntary surrender of someone whose body had been standing in the cold too long and had opinions about warmth. Mincio sat between them, immediately signing something to his father that Ades only partially caught. Something about the restaurant and the food, and she laughed a lot, and Jiho listened with the concentrated attention of a man for whom this child was, apparently, the one thing in the world that remained completely unguarded. She watched that too. The man who had commanded a street full of armed enforcers to step back with 3 words sat in the dark of an expensive car and listened to his deaf son sign about japchae with his entire body angled toward the boy like a compass finding north. Careful, some part of Ades said quietly. She was not sure which part or which warning exactly it was delivering. The car moved through Busan at a speed that suggested traffic laws were a matter of personal interpretation when you were plunged. The house was not a house. Ades understood this the moment the car turned through the gates, and the gates, iron, tall, the kind that communicated turned back in every language simultaneously, closed behind them with the soft finality of a decision already made. It was a compound, perched on the elevated edge of Busan, like something that had decided the city existed for its viewing pleasure. Modern architecture that had been given an unlimited budget and no instruction to be humble about it. Glass and stone and clean, brutal lines against the night sky. Lights that knew exactly what they were illuminating and why. The kind of place that didn't appear on any map. The kind of place that didn't need to. Ades stepped out of the car and looked up at it with the expression she reserved for things that were simultaneously beautiful and mildly threatening, which, in her experience, covered a surprising amount of territory. You live here, she said. Yes, Jiho said. This is a normal amount of house. He looked at her. Is that sarcasm? It's an observation, she said. I'm Nigerian. We built the pyramids. I don't get impressed easily. Something moved across his face. She was beginning to catalog these micro-expressions. They were the only honest thing about him, and they lasted approximately half a second before he collected them and filed them somewhere private. Mincio, who had been carried from the car by one of the suited men with the gentle efficiency of a household that had practice with sleeping children, had already been taken inside. Jiho gestured toward the entrance. She followed. The inside was worse. Not worse badly, worse in the way that things were when they had been curated by someone with tastes so developed it had stopped being taste and become a philosophy. Everything deliberate, nothing soft. Art on the walls that Adahaz couldn't identify but could feel the weight of. Floors that reflected the ceiling lights like shallow water. A home designed by someone who understood beauty and had decided that comfort was a separate and optional category. Sit, Jiho said. You give a lot of instructions, Ades said. People usually follow them. I'm not people, she said pleasantly, and sat down anyway because she had been on her feet for 6 hours, and her dignity had a practical limit. A woman appeared from a side corridor, 50s, efficient face, the expression of someone who had worked for dangerous men long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. She set tea down without being asked and disappeared with the seamlessness of someone who had perfected the art of existing only when useful. Jiho sat across from Ades. He looked at her the way he had looked at his men outside. Not with aggression, but with the particular attention of someone taking inventory. Like he was cataloging her the same way she had been cataloging him. She let him look. She had nothing to hide and considerable patience. Your NGO, he said finally. Not a question. Sign language interpreter. Advocate for deaf communities across West Africa. Currently on fellowship in Seoul. She tilted her head. You had someone run my details. In the car. While your son was sleeping between us. I have a dead boy's trust to protect, he said simply. I don't apologize for due diligence. She considered this. It was, she admitted to herself, Not an unreasonable position for a man who had spent 20 years surviving in the way that Jiho had clearly been surviving. You didn't build something like this, the compound, the men, the citywide network of cameras, by extending easy trust to strangers who appeared in your son's orbit. Fine, she said. And now that your due diligence is complete? Now I know you're exactly what you appear to be. Which is? Dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with weapons, he said. Adaez blinked. That was possibly the most precisely accurate thing anyone had ever said about her, and she had not remotely expected it to come from him. She picked up her tea. You sign, she said. I saw you with Mincio. You're fluent. I learned when he was diagnosed. He was 2. Something in his voice changed, the same current she had seen in the car, moving through him briefly before the control came back down like a curtain. His mother didn't stay. She said she hadn't signed up for. He stopped. It doesn't matter what she said, but it did. They both knew it. You learned an entire language for your son, Adaez said. He needed someone who could talk to him. Most fathers wouldn't. I'm aware, he said. She looked at him across the low table, this man built from violence and money and grief, who had learned sign language in the ruins of a marriage so that his deaf son would not be alone in the world, who had watched a stranger take 2 slaps for that son on a security camera feed and been unable to breathe. Careful, said the quiet part of her again. She was listening to it less than she should have been. I owe you an apology, Jiho said. It came out like something he had rehearsed, not insincere but unfamiliar, like a word in a language he had not spoken often. My men acted without. They were operating on incomplete information. They saw an unknown woman with my son and... They slapped me, Adaez said. Yes. Twice. Yes. I want that acknowledged clearly before we move past it. It is acknowledged, he said. Clearly. A pause. The man who slapped you has been removed from my detail, Jiho added. Adaez opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't ask for that. No, I decided it. I didn't want anyone punished on my behalf. He wasn't punished on your behalf, Jiho said. He was removed because a man who raises his hand to a woman protecting a child has demonstrated a judgment problem I can't afford. She stared at him. He met her gaze with perfect steadiness. There was a sound from upstairs. Small feet. The particular rhythm of a child who had slept for 20 minutes and decided that was sufficient. Mincio appeared at the top of the staircase in pajamas, spotted Adaez, and signed with enormous satisfaction. I told you about the dog. As if on cue, the dog appeared. It was, Adaez noted, exactly as advertised. Large. Black. Moving at a speed that suggested it had somewhere important to be, and was late. It crossed the living room in approximately 4 seconds, assessed Adaez with the focused attention of an animal that had opinions, and then placed its enormous head directly in her lap. His name is Yaksok, Jiho said. What does it mean? Jiho looked at the dog, then at her. Promise, he said. Mincio came down the stairs and settled beside Adaez on the sofa with the casual ownership of a child who had decided she was furniture he was allowed to use, and signed, Do you have to go? Adaez looked at the boy, at the dog occupying her lap, at the man across from her who had said the word promise and then looked away. Not yet, she said. 1 hour became 3. She did not notice until she checked her phone and found it was nearly midnight, and she had spent the last hour teaching Mincio 3 signs he didn't know, and explaining to Jiho, who had moved at some point from the chair across from her to the other end of the same sofa, the structural differences between Nigerian Sign Language and Korean Sign Language, while Yaksok redistributed himself across both their feet like a very heavy, very committed throw rug. She stood up, too quickly. I should go, she said. I'll have someone drive you, Jiho said. I can. Adaez. Her name in his mouth was a strange thing, careful, like he had practiced the syllables privately before using them. Let me do this one thing without an argument. Mincio tugged her sleeve. Signed? Come back? She looked at the boy. She looked at the dog. She looked, briefly and against her better judgment, at Jiho. Maybe, she said. Which, for Adaez Okonkwo, who had arrived in Busan for Galbi and anonymity and absolutely not, she went back. She told herself it was because of Mincio. This was partially true. Mincio had signed come back with the straightforward emotional confidence of a child who had not yet learned to protect himself from wanting things, and Adaez had spent 11 years advocating for children who asked for less than they deserved and received even less than that. She was constitutionally incapable of disappointing him. She told herself it was not because of Jiho. This was considerably less true. She returned on Sunday afternoon, which was technically still within the boundary of her Busan weekend, which meant it was technically not a deviation from her plan, which meant she was technically still a person with a plan, and not a woman who had spent Saturday night lying in her hotel room, replaying a conversation about sign language and a dog named Promise, with the focused attention of someone trying to locate the exact moment things had shifted. She had not located it. She suspected it had happened somewhere around Dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with weapons, but she was not prepared to confirm that theory publicly. The gates opened before her car stopped. They had been expecting her. She found this both reassuring and mildly alarming, which was becoming the standard emotional register for anything involving Kwon Ji-ho. Min Seo met her at the door. He was wearing a sweater with a cartoon bear on it that was aggressively at odds with the architectural severity of everything behind him, and he signed "You came back" with the particular triumph of a child who had placed a bet on a person and won. Yaksok arrived 4 seconds later and made his position on her return abundantly clear by attempting to climb into her arms despite being the approximate size and weight of a small sofa. Ji-ho appeared in the doorway of a room off the main hall. He was not in the suit. This was new information that Ada's processed and immediately filed under irrelevant with slightly more effort than should have been necessary. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled, the kind of casual that on Dangerous men didn't actually read as casual at all, but rather as a different category of dangerous. "You came," he said. "I told Min Seo maybe," she said. "He signed it back to me as yes. He does that. Smart child." Terrifyingly, Ji-ho agreed. The afternoon unfolded with the particular quality of time that moved differently than expected. Too fast in the good moments. Too slow in the ones where she caught herself noticing things she shouldn't be noticing. The way Ji-ho watched Min Seo with that complete, unguarded attention. The way the compound, which had seemed cold and architectural on Friday night, held warmth in the specific rooms where the boy existed. The kitchen, which smelled like someone had been cooking for hours. A small library off the east corridor where someone had installed a low shelf at a 7-year-old's height, stocked entirely with picture books in both Korean and English. She stopped in front of that shelf. "He reads in both languages?" she asked. "He's learning," Ji-ho said from behind her. "His English is better than my staff's, which they find humiliating." "You have English picture books in a compound in Busan." "I have whatever my son needs," he said, simply, without weight or performance, just fact. She turned and found him closer than she expected, which in the narrow corridor of the library meant considerably closer than comfortable. She took one step back and met the shelf. He didn't move forward. He simply existed in the space, which was somehow worse. "You should see the rest of the house," he said. "That is an extremely smooth subject change." "I'm not known for subtlety." "You're known for being feared by every city official in Busan," Adaze said. "I looked you up last night." Something sharpened in his expression. And the internet has strong opinions about you." She paused. "Some of them appear to be written by people who are afraid of you. Some by people who owe you something. A small number by journalists who started articles and appear to have thought better of finishing them." "Accurate," he said. "You run the Kwon organization," she said, "which controls, based on what I could find, which I suspect is considerably less than the reality, shipping infrastructure, private security contracts, and what 3 separate sources described as interests that don't require elaboration." "Also accurate. You've been investigated 4 times by the Korean National Police Agency." 5, he corrected. "They missed one." She stared at him. "You're correcting the count upward. Accuracy matters." Ji-ho. His name came out before she could stop it, and they both noticed. "I am an NGO worker from Lagos. I teach sign language and write grant proposals, and once spent 3 weeks in a village with no running water advocating for a deaf child's right to attend school. I am not." She gestured broadly at the compound, the corridor, him. "This is not my world." He looked at her steadily. "I know what world you're from. Then you understand why I'm telling you that whatever this afternoon is, it has a ceiling." "Does it?" "It has to." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Min Seo asked me this morning if you were going to be his teacher." Adaze closed her eyes briefly. "Ji-ho." "I told him I didn't know." A pause. "That was the most honest thing I've said in years." She opened her eyes. He was watching her with that inventory expression. Careful, complete, the expression of a man who had survived by seeing things clearly and was applying that skill now to something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the specific danger of wanting. She was rescued, as she was beginning to suspect she would frequently be rescued, by Min Seo. The boy appeared in the corridor doorway, took one look at the two of them standing in the narrow library space, and signed to his father with the blunt diplomatic honesty available only to 7-year-olds. "Why are you standing so close to her?" Ji-ho stepped back. Adaze covered her mouth. Min Seo, satisfied that order had been restored, signed. Lunch is ready. Mrs. Cho made doenjang jjigae. Come. Then he turned and walked back to the kitchen with the authority of someone who had issued a summons and expected compliance. They followed. Lunch was extraordinary. Mrs. Cho, the efficient woman from Friday night, turned out to have a cooking philosophy that treated every meal as a personal statement, and her doenjang jjigae arrived at the table with the confidence of something that knew exactly what it was. Adaes ate more than she intended and complimented the cook in the 3 Korean words she knew, which Mrs. Cho received with the first genuine smile Adaes had seen from her. Brief, warm, immediately professional again. Min Seo ate steadily and signed commentary throughout the meal with the relaxed ownership of a child in his natural habitat. He signed a story about Yaksok eating a shoe. He signed something about a friend at school that made Jiho's jaw tighten briefly before he smoothed it. He signed to Adaes 3 times variations of "I'm glad you came back." She answered each one. Jiho watched her answer each one. After lunch, while Min Seo was occupied with Yaksok in the garden, Jiho walked her to the window overlooking the yard and stood beside her in a silence that had stopped being uncomfortable sometime around the second bowl of jjigae and had become something else entirely. The kind of silence 2 people built together when words were temporarily insufficient. "His friend at school," Adaes said. "The one you reacted to." Jiho was quiet. "You don't have to answer," she said. "His name is Jun Seo," Jiho said. "He's in Min Seo's class. He's also deaf. 2 weeks ago, 3 older boys cornered them both on the school grounds." His voice remained level. The control was extraordinary. "Min Seo didn't tell me for 5 days. Because he knew what you would do," Adaes said. "Yes." "And what did you do?" A pause. "The school has new administration," Jiho said carefully, "and the boys involved have developed a profound and lasting respect for the concept of consequences." She didn't ask for more details. She had the shape of it. "He needs more than consequences delivered on his behalf," she said. "He needs language, community, people who understand." "I know what he needs," Jiho said quietly. "I've known since he was 2 years old, and I was sitting in a hospital office being handed pamphlets by a doctor who spoke about my son's deafness like it was a malfunction." Something moved under the surface of his voice, old and deep and still sharp. "I've been building what he needs ever since. He stopped. "Haven't found all of it." 3 weeks passed. Adaes returned to Seoul and resumed her fellowship with the disciplined focus of a woman who had made a decision and was committed to it. The decision was simple. Busan was a weekend. Jiho was a complication she could not afford. Min Seo was a child she had helped and could carry warmly in her memory without requiring a sequel. This was an excellent decision. She lasted 11 days. Min Seo messaged first. Through Jiho's phone, which meant Jiho had either given the boy the phone or the boy had acquired it through means that suggested a future in either diplomacy or organized crime. The message was a photograph of Yaksok wearing what appeared to be a small hat. The caption, signed in a video attached below, was, "He doesn't like it, but I like it so it stays." Adaes laughed so hard she knocked her coffee over. She messaged back, "Just a response to Min Seo, perfectly reasonable." Jiho replied, "Not as Min Seo, as himself. 3 words. He misses you." She stared at those 3 words for longer than was reasonable for a woman who had made an excellent decision. She typed back, "Tell him I miss him too." A pause. Then, "I'll pass that along." Another pause. Longer. Then, "He's not the only one." Adaes put her phone face down on the desk and stared at the ceiling of her Seoul office for approximately 4 minutes, while her fellowship colleague Priya asked twice if she was having a medical event. She was not having a medical event. She was having something considerably more inconvenient. The messages continued. Carefully at first, updates about Min Seo, questions about sign language resources, a photo of a new book Jiho had found in English and Korean that Min Seo had apparently declared acceptable, which was, Adaes gathered, high praise from a 7-year-old with standards. Gradually, the messages shifted, lengthened, moved past Min Seo as subject and into territory that had no practical NGO justification whatsoever. Jiho asked about Lagos, about her work, about the village with no running water, and the child whose right to education she had spent 3 weeks fighting for. He asked questions that were specific and genuine, not the polite questions of someone filling conversational space, but the questions of a person who was actually listening to the answers and filing them somewhere. She asked about him. Carefully, he answered. Also carefully. She learned things. He had taken over the Kwan organization at 23, after his father's death, which had not been natural and had not been investigated with any seriousness, because the kind of men who investigated such things had already been persuaded that their interests were better served elsewhere. He had spent the following decade consolidating, expanding, and constructing around himself a structure so complete that by the time Min Seo was born, Kwon Ji-ho was not merely feared, he was institutional. He had married Min Seo's mother at 28. She had left at 31, 18 months after Min Seo's diagnosis, with a settlement that Ji-ho described in exactly 4 words: she was well compensated, and an expression in his voice, even through text, that said the financial transaction had been the least painful part. He had raised Min Seo alone since then. Or not alone. There was staff, security, Mrs. Cho who cooked like feeding people was a form of argument she intended to win. But alone in the way that mattered. No partner. No one to sit beside him at the window and watch his son laugh in the garden. Adaez read this and did not examine why it landed the way it did. She was very busy not examining things. On the 14th day of messaging, Ji-ho sent, "I have business in Seoul on Friday. Dinner, if you're willing." She looked at the message. She looked at it for a long time. She typed, "That depends. Are you bringing security?" He replied, "Do you want me to?" She typed, "Absolutely not. I refuse to eat dinner surrounded by men with jaw problems." His response took 30 seconds. Then, Friday, 7. "I'll send you the restaurant." The restaurant he sent was extraordinary. A private dining room in a building that didn't have a sign because signs were for establishments that needed to attract customers. And this establishment had, she suspected, never needed to attract anything. The kind of place where the menu arrived without prices because the prices were a conversation to be had elsewhere, between other people. She wore a green dress that she had bought in Seoul 3 weeks ago and told herself at the time was for a work event. She had not worn it to a work event. Ji-ho was already there when she arrived. No security visible. This was either a genuine gesture of normalcy or the security was present and simply better than she could detect, which, given what she knew about his operation, was entirely possible. She decided not to audit the room. He stood when she entered. She had not expected that. She noted the not expecting, filed it, and sat down across from him with the composure of a woman who had absolutely been practicing this composure in the mirror of her Seoul apartment bathroom and would deny it completely. "You came," he said. "I said I would." "People say things," he said. "You do them. Is that an observation or a compliment?" "Both," he said. The dinner was extraordinary. Not because of the food, which was also extraordinary, but because of the particular quality of 2 hours with a person who was genuinely interesting in ways she had not given herself permission to fully acknowledge until she was sitting across from him with no child between them, no dog redistributing himself across their feet, no corridor library to provide architectural interruption. He was funny. This surprised her most. Not performance humor, not the practiced wit of a man who had learned that charm was useful, dry and dark and precise, delivered with the deadpan timing of someone who found the world genuinely absurd and had decided that was the only appropriate response. He said something about a city council meeting he had attended the previous month, the kind of meeting where every official in the room owed him something and was performing normalcy with the desperation of bad actors in a community theater production. And Adaez laughed so suddenly and fully that the server glanced over. She had not laughed like that in months. She had not laughed like that, she realized, since before Emeka, since before the kitchen and the careful explanation and the 6 weeks of her mother's sympathy casserole. Ji-ho watched her laugh. Something in his expression shifted, not the ghost this time, not the flicker. Something slower and more deliberate, something that stayed. "Tell me about the man," he said. She stopped laughing. "Excuse me?" "The one you left Lagos for," he said, not aggressively, not with the territorial energy of a man staking a claim, quietly, like someone who had done research and was confirming details. "You said you needed distance. You said you needed air. Those are things people need when someone else has used up the air in the room." Adaez looked at him. "You researched me," she said. "In the car," he said. "On the first night. But that only told me professional history. The personal." A pause. "I noticed." "What did you notice? That you eat alone like it's a skill you've practiced recently. That you sign to Min Seo with your full attention, but when no one needs you, you go somewhere else behind your eyes." He looked at her steadily. "That you're healing from something you haven't named out loud yet." The restaurant was quiet around them. Adaez picked up her glass and looked at it. "His name was Emeka," she said. "We were together 4 years. I found out the way women always find out, not dramatically, not a confrontation. Just a Tuesday morning and information that rearranged everything." She set the glass down. "He said I made everything about a cause. He wanted someone simpler." "He was a fool," Ji-ho said. He was a man who wanted something easier than me, she said, which is at least honest. It's not a virtue, Jiho said, wanting the easier version of a person. She looked at him across the table. What do you want? The question came out before she screened it. She watched him receive it, watched him sit with it for a moment without deflecting, without the control coming down. I don't know how to want things carefully, he said finally. I've only ever wanted things completely. It's caused problems. I imagine it has, she said. But I know what I'm looking at, he said, when something is worth the problem. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight and warmth and the particular quality of a door standing open. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at it. Something changed in his face. Not the ghost, not the flicker. Something cold and fast and entirely different from anything she had seen from him across the previous 3 hours. He stood. Fear was a language Adaez understood. Not because she had lived inside danger the way Jiho had, not the structured, deliberate danger of men who built empires from violence and called it business, but 11 years of working in underfunded systems, corrupt bureaucracies, and communities the world had decided were inconvenient had taught her what fear felt like when it arrived with a name attached. This was different. This had her name attached. She stood in the lobby of the restaurant while Jiho's car idled outside and processed the specific quality of being named by people she had never met. In a country she had come to for distance and harbor air and 48 hours of anonymity. The irony was not lost on her. She had run from one life to find quiet. She had found the opposite of quiet. She had found specifically a situation that required a threat assessment. Jiho's driver appeared at the lobby entrance. Not one of the granite jaw men from Busan, but a younger man with a careful face and the particular posture of someone who had been given instructions to treat this passenger with a specific category of care. Miss Okonkwo, he said, I'll take you back to your apartment. Is it safe? She asked. He paused, which was answer enough. Jiho sent 2 men ahead, the driver said carefully. Your building is being assessed. She absorbed this. Her sole apartment, her quiet fellowship apartment with the narrow kitchen and the window that faced east and the bookshelf she had arranged 3 times before it felt right, was being assessed by men in suits because someone had taken her photograph in Busan and sent it to a Mafia compound as a message. Right, she said. Let's go. The drive back was the longest 20 minutes of her recent life, which was saying something given the competition. She sat in the back of the car and looked at Seoul sliding past the windows and had a direct and honest conversation with herself. The conversation went as follows. She had come to Korea healing. She had been healing well. She had distance, purpose, work that mattered, a fellowship that paid adequately and demanded enough of her brain to leave less room for the specific pain of being left for someone simpler. She had a plan. 3 months. Return to Lagos. Rebuild. Resume. She had not planned for a deaf boy in a corner booth. She had not planned for a dog named Promise. She had not planned for a man who had learned an entire language for his son and asked questions that were specific and genuine and said dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with weapons like it was the most straightforward observation in the world. She had not planned for her name in a threat. The apartment building came into view. 2 men stood outside it with the subtle visibility of people who were technically just standing there and definitely not conducting security operations. They nodded at the car. The driver nodded back. Inside, her apartment was untouched. She stood in the center of it for a moment, breathing. The bookshelf was still arranged the way she'd left it. The narrow kitchen still smelled faintly of the egusi soup she'd attempted last week with inadequate ingredients and considerable optimism. Her phone rang. Jiho, she answered. You're inside? He said. Yes, your men are very visible, by the way. The one by the east entrance is standing like he's posing for a threat. I'll pass that feedback along. A pause. Days. I'm fine, she said before he could say whatever careful thing he was preparing to say. I'm fine, and I'm thinking clearly, and I need you to tell me exactly what the message said. Silence. Jiho. It said, he said slowly, that careless associations have consequences. That my son's new friend should consider returning home before the cost of friendship became more than she could afford. The room was very quiet. It's Cha Sung-min, Jiho said. His voice had gone flat in a way that was more frightening than anger. He runs a rival organization in Seoul. We've been in conflict over shipping routes for 8 months. He's been looking for leverage. And I'm leverage, Adai said. You were visible, Jiho said. The harbor footage circulated. You protected Min Seo. In my world, that makes you. He stopped. Important to you, she finished. Yes. She sat down on the edge of her bed. This is a problem. I know. I'm not equipped for this, Jiho. I don't have security infrastructure. I'm an NGO worker. My danger management strategy until last month was aggressive email filters and knowing which Lagos neighborhoods to avoid after dark. I know what you are, he said quietly. I know exactly what you are and what world you're from, and I should have. He stopped again. The control was back, but underneath it she could hear something that was not controlled at all. I should have been more careful about being seen with you. Are you apologizing for having dinner with me? I'm apologizing for making you a target. She stood up, walked to the east window. The man outside was still standing like he was auditioning for something. What are you going to do about Cha Sung-min? She asked. What I do, Jiho said simply. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have in the language you're comfortable with, he said. The full answer involves vocabulary you've decided you don't want. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. Min Seo, she said. Is he? He's with me. He's safe. He doesn't know anything is wrong. A pause, softer. He asked about you before he went to sleep. He wanted to know if dinner was nice. Something moved through her chest. What did you tell him? I told him it was very nice, Jiho said, and that you would be in touch tomorrow. You told him that before calling to inform me I'm in a Mafia turf conflict. I was optimistic about the order of information. She laughed, despite everything. Despite the assessed apartment and the posing security man, and her name and a threat delivered to a compound in Busan. She laughed, and she heard something shift in Jiho's breathing on the other end of the line. A release, small and brief, like a man who had been holding something and had just been given permission to set it down temporarily. I'm not going home, she said. Adayes. I have a fellowship. I have work. I have 3 months remaining and commitments to communities that exist whether or not Cha Sung-min has opinions about my friendships. She turned from the window. I'm not leaving because someone sent a photograph. It's not just a photograph. I know what it is, she said. I'm not naive and I'm not performing bravery. I'm telling you that I did not leave Lagos and cross the world to be chased out of Seoul by a man I've never met over a situation I walked into with clean hands. The silence on the line was long. You are, Jiho said finally, exactly what you appear to be. You've said that before. It keeps being true. She sat back down. The apartment settled around her, her books, her narrow kitchen, her arranged shelf. Everything familiar and now quietly altered, the way spaces felt different after you learned they had been watched. I want to see Min Seo this weekend, she said. Adaes. Not a negotiation. I want to see him. And I want you to explain to me in full what is happening with Cha Sung-min, because I refuse to be a variable in a situation I'm not informed about. Another long silence. Saturday, Jiho said. Come to Busan. I'll be there at noon. I'll send a car. I'll take the train, she said, like a person. She could hear him deciding whether to push back on this. He didn't. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she confirmed. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she opened her laptop and did what she did when situations required clarity. She worked. Grant proposal, due Monday. A deaf child in Incheon whose school had denied him an interpreter for the 3rd consecutive semester. Bureaucratic obstruction dressed up in budget language, the same in every country. The same exhausting performance of systems pretending limitation was principle. She wrote for 2 hours. She was good at it. She was good at finding the precise words that turned indifference into accountability, that made the cost of inaction visible to people who preferred not to see it. At midnight, she made tea and stood at her window. The security man had been replaced by a different one. Saturday arrived the way important days always did, ordinary on the surface, seismic underneath. Adaes took the train to Busan. She had insisted on this, and she was committed to it, and she sat in the KTX with her bag on her lap and her fellowship notes open on her tablet and read the same paragraph about interpreter access policy 4 times without retaining a single word, because her brain had decided that policy was not the priority this morning. She arrived at Busan Station at 12:03. Jiho was on the platform, not a driver, not a suited man with a jaw situation. Jiho himself, in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, standing on the platform of a public train station like a man who had decided that normal was something he was going to attempt today and was giving it his full commitment. She stopped walking for half a second. Then she kept walking, because she was not going to be a woman who stopped walking on train platforms over a man standing in a coat. You said you'd send a car, she said. I said I'd consider sending a car, he said. You said, I was in the area, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. You were not in the area, she said. No, he agreed. I was not. They stood on the platform while Busan moved around them. Commuters, families, a group of elderly women with matching luggage who navigated the crowd with the coordinated efficiency of a military operation, And the particular absurdity of the situation settled over Adae's like something she was no longer fighting. Kwon Ji-ho, who controlled shipping infrastructure and had been investigated 5 times and commanded rooms full of dangerous men with 3 words, had driven to Busan Station to meet her train. Because she had refused a car, like a person. "Minseo is at the compound?" she asked. "With Mrs. Cho. He's been awake since 6, preparing to show you something he won't tell me about. That's either wonderful or alarming." "With Minseo," Jiho said, "it is frequently both." They walked to the car together. Not his usual vehicle, something less conspicuous, which was a relative term when the man beside you moved through a crowd the way Jiho moved. With the particular gravity of someone, the space rearranged itself around. People looked, not because they recognized him necessarily, but because something in the human animal responded to proximity to that kind of contained authority. Adaes noticed this and filed it. In the car, he told her about Cha Sung-min. All of it this time. Not the careful version shaped for her comfort. The full version, with the vocabulary she had told him she didn't want and had since decided she needed. Cha Sung-min had been expanding into Busan for 2 years. Shipping routes, port access, the specific infrastructure that Jiho's organization had controlled for a decade. 8 months ago, the conflict had sharpened. 2 of Jiho's operations disrupted. A contract pulled by a port authority official who had subsequently developed a remarkable improvement in his personal finances. A message sent through intermediaries that translated roughly to make room or make enemies. Jiho had made neither. He had instead been quietly building a legal case, documented evidence of corruption, of bribery, of the port authority official and 3 others whose financial improvements had specific and traceable sources. He had been 3 weeks from delivering it to a prosecutor he trusted, which was a short list, when Adozi's photograph arrived. "He wanted to slow me down," Jiho said. "Make me reactive instead of methodical. If I respond to the threat against you with force, I'm visible. I give him something to counter with." "So the photograph was a provocation," Adozi said, "designed to make me abandon the legal strategy and revert to what you usually do." "Yes." She looked at him. "And have you? Abandoned it?" "No," he said. "But it's been a difficult 3 days. Because of me. Because someone put your name in a document intended to frighten me," he said. His voice was flat and controlled, and underneath it was something that was not flat or controlled at all. "That has consequences I'm managing. Are you going to tell me what those consequences are?" "Not in a car." They arrived at the compound. Minseo was at the gate before it fully opened, which meant he had been watching from a window. Which meant he had been watching for some time. He signed "You're here" with both hands and his entire upper body, and the unrestrained physical enthusiasm of a child, for whom joy was a full contact activity. Yaksok arrived 17 seconds later and attempted to reconcile his excitement and his size with the limited physics of the gate entrance, a negotiation he handled poorly. Adaes crouched and hugged Minseo properly. The full, real hug of a person who had watched a video of him whispering in a dark hallway 3 times and had feelings about it that she was still processing. He hugged back with both arms, hard. She stood and found Jiho watching them with the unguarded expression, the one she had first seen in the car on the night of the restaurant, the one that lasted longer now, the one he had stopped trying to file away quickly. She looked at him. He looked back. Minseo tugged her sleeve urgently, signed, "Come, I have to show you." What he had to show her was in the small library off the east corridor. He had rearranged the low shelf, organized the books into categories she could read from the signs he had made to label them. Animals, people, places, funny, sad, both. He had added, in the middle of the shelf, a new section, 2 books, both Nigerian. A picture book about Lagos that she had mentioned once, in passing, in a signed conversation she had assumed was casual. He had found them, somehow, and placed them in his library. He signed carefully and with the concentration of someone who had practiced. "I wanted books from your home too. So your home is in my library. Is that okay?" Adaes stood in the corridor library and did not cry because she had made a decision about that. She did not make it. She crouched to Minseo's height and signed, "It is more than okay. It is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a very long time." Minseo processed this, looked pleased, and then signed with the pivot speed of a 7-year-old whose emotional processing was complete. "Can you teach me to say hello in Nigerian today?" She laughed, wiped her face with the back of her hand, stood. Jiho was in the doorway. He had seen everything. She looked at him and said nothing, and there was nothing to say because they had arrived somewhere that words were a secondary language, and both of them knew it. Later, after hello in Igbo, after lunch, after Yaksok fell asleep on the books Minseo was trying to read and refused to move, After Mrs. Cho produced dessert with the energy of someone making a point, Jiho took her to a room she hadn't seen before, a study. Floor to ceiling with the accumulated evidence of a man who ran an empire. Documents, screens, organized information with the architecture of a mind that processed complexity for survival. And on the desk, a folder. The prosecutor receives this Monday, Jiho said. Cha Sung-min, the port official, 2 others. Documented. Airtight. He looked at her. It ends legally, which means visibly, which means Cha loses his operation and his freedom and his ability to send photographs of anyone. And you? She asked. Your organization isn't clean, Jiho. My organization is complicated, he said. The case is structured to address what it addresses. My lawyer is very good. That's not a complete answer. No, he said. It's not. He met her eyes. I told you I don't know how to want things carefully. I've been thinking, since Friday, since your name in that document, about what it means to want something and be the kind of man I am. A pause. About whether those 2 things can exist in the same space. She looked at him. And I don't have a clean answer, he said. I have a complicated one. The same kind I give Min-seo when he asks me hard questions. I tell him the true thing even when it doesn't resolve neatly. He looked at her steadily. I am what I am. I'm also trying to build something different, slowly, legally, where I can. I can't promise you a simple world. I can promise you an honest one. The room was quiet. Adaes looked at this man, built by war and money and loss, who had learned sign language in the ruins of his marriage, who had driven to a train station because she'd refused a car, whose 7-year-old son had put Nigerian books in his library so her home would have a shelf. I didn't come to Korea for simple, she said. I know, he said. I came to heal from a man who wanted me simpler. I know that too. I am not, she said, a simple woman. Adaes, her name again in his mouth, careful and practiced and entirely deliberate. I am not looking for simple. I have never once in my life wanted simple. Simple is for men who are afraid of the full version of things. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. She looked up. He was taller than comfortable, which was its own kind of problem, and said, if this becomes what I think it's becoming, it has to be honest. All of it. Not managed, not shaped for my comfort. Honest. Yes, he said, without pause. And Min-seo already put your home in his library, Jiho said quietly. He made that decision before either of us did. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she signed, slowly, the same signs she had used in a harbor restaurant to a boy who had not been seen in a room full of people. Hello. I see you. Are you okay? Something moved through Jiho's face. Not a ghost, not a flicker. Something full and unhurried and completely real that he did not file away or control or fold back into the harder version of himself. He signed back, slowly, carefully, with the hands of a man who had learned this language for love and was using it now for the same reason. I am. Now. From down the hall came the sound of Min-seo's laughter, the full body, completely unrestrained laughter of a child in his natural habitat, probably at Yaksok's expense. And it moved through the walls of the study like something the compound had never held before. Warmth. Uncomplicated and complete. Adesi smiled. Jiho watched her smile the way he had watched her laugh.